Hello again, everybody on YouTube, especially you audiophiles, audio nerds, recording engineers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about what happens when you have either a small interface or something that just needs an extra set of inputs, an extra set of microphone preamps, because today we're going to be talking about using the Audient ASP800. So what is the Audient ASP800? That's probably a good place to start. It's a 1-unit rack mount piece of equipment that's got 8 microphone preamps in it, and it's got line level outputs for those, so you can send those straight to converters if you have them, and it also has ADAT out, which is the optical. So if you've got something like, say, an Audient ID22, I think it is, that's got an ADAT input, so it's only got a couple of mic channels. If you want to mic up a full band or at least a drum kit or whatever, you can add 8 extra microphone inputs to that from the ASP800. Now, it's not the cheapest set of mic preamps with an ADAT out that I've ever seen, but it's got a lot of features and a lot of sound quality that you won't find in this price range from anybody else, in my opinion. So, it's one of those things where it's got 2 what I would call super channels and 6 regular channels. The way that I'm using it, my studio revolves around an RME ADAT card, which is one of their Hammerfall cards, which goes straight into my studio PC, and that has a ton of ADAT input and outputs, so I can expand my setup. So that's kind of the big boy way of doing it. But if you've just got a 2-channel interface, it's got an ADAT in, you can use one of these as well to make that into a 10-channel interface, because then there's your extra microphone preamps. Job done. And if 10's enough for you, say you're miking up a small drum kit or whatever it may be, or you just need better preamps than your current interface currently has, but you don't want to invest in replacing the interface entirely, this is a good way to go about it. So, the feature set on this is you can synchronize this unit to an external device using the word clock input, and that's how I'm running it. I'm running a really long cable, a BNC word clock cable, all the way over, so that then there is a button on the right hand side of the ASP800, and if I set that to the green mode, it starts flashing because it's not locked. And then if the word clock works, which it always has done in the short time that I've had this, every sample rate, I set the sample rate myself, and the ASP800 just works it out and goes, oh, we should be running at this sample rate now. If you're running an interface that doesn't have word clock output, then the other option is to take the timing as the master clock from the ASP800. So you press that button that's on the side and you choose then the sample rate 44, 48, 88 or 96. And then you tell your interface you'll be running at this sample rate and use the timing from the ASP800. So that's how you would set it up that way. Alternatively, like I was saying at the beginning, if you've got some really high-end analog to digital converters that don't have mic preamps, there is a D-sub on the back, you know, one of those big kind of 25-pin plug things that can go out at line level, so it can make the mic level signals up to line level and then out to whatever else, or maybe not even converters, maybe if you go into, I don't know, like compressors or straight to a mixing desk with extra line inputs or whatever, this will work in that way. Now, channels 3 to 8 are simple. They just have a gain knob. They have a separate 48-volt phantom power button, which is great, by the way, because up till now my main units have been Focusrite Octo Pre's. One of the downsides to those is the shared phantom power, which has got like 4 channels. If you press one button, it's got phantom power on them all. The good thing about doing it this way is that I can put phantom power on for a condenser, and on a separate channel I could have a ribbon mic, and I can be safe in the knowledge that there is no phantom power, no 48 volts going to that microphone, so I can feel a lot better about that just being safe, which is something that I think any set of preamps should do, but there it is. The other thing that each one of those channels has is they all have a separate pad. Again, a lot of interfaces in this price range don't have a pad on each channel. Now the pads are important because if you've got a mic that's kicking out loads of volume, or a DI box that's coming up a bit hot, or any number of things that are just a bit too loud so that even with the gain completely off on the channel it's still clipping, you press the pad button in. That's an analog pad, so before it's made into digital, that'll make sure it doesn't clip, which is fantastic. I've had to use, over the last few years, I've had to use these inline barrel pads, which are useful, but you've got to then go find them, you've got to make sure they're on hand, and it can be quite an inconvenience, and just to have this functionality of a pad on a button on every single channel is absolutely great. It means they don't have to come out. Now, let's talk about the super channels. As far as I'm aware, if you leave these two channels with all the buttons disengaged, they sound exactly like the other channels. So they're all clean, they're all neutral, they're all transparent, and they're all relatively fast, which means they keep a lot of the dynamics and transients, which for a modern preamp, I would argue is what you want. If you're going down the vintage route of, classic vintage preamp sounds, that's a very different thing. That's a very different way of working, and that's something that you would do in a separate way, and I might talk about that in another video. If you're going down the modern route, which is what I like to do, I like to have these modern, fast preamps and then colour them in software now, because then if I decide afterwards that I didn't want to do that and decided that I wanted a cleaner sound, I can just take it off later and I've still got that fast neutral thing. Anyway, that brings me to the options that you get on these two super channels. Now it's quite a heavy little unit, the ASP800, and the reason for that is that it has transformers in it. Transformers are big lumps of metal that all the mic preamps that were made in the 70s had. Like the Neve 1073 is a fantastic example of a preamp that really gets its sound from the use of the transformers, and it's that big fat ringing tone that's got some high-end sweetness to it. They quite often call it the big iron sound. So the iron button puts the transformers into the signal paths on these two channels. Now the iron has a rotating set. I keep looking over at it because it's currently in my rack being used. So it goes from sparkle to growl, which kind of is how hard you are hitting the transformers, which subtly affects the sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these little features, then I'm going to play you a guitar part which I'm going to reamp so that it's exactly the same each time, and I'm not going to touch the microphones, I'm just going to change these settings. The other setting to talk about is one that's really quite interesting to me, which is the HMX. Now the HMX is an interesting one because this roughly models how a tube circuit would behave in a preamp. It's not, strictly speaking, a tube emulation, which I'm quite glad of, because if they claimed it was a complete tube emulation, they'd have to try really hard to get it really accurate, because tubes are odd and they do these non-linear things. This is just adding some of that harmonic fatness and sweetness that you could get from a tube preamp circuit, but still leaving it relatively kind of clean and clear, so it's just a bit of a sweetener, which is nice on things like vocals. And so without further ado, here's some examples of a guitar amp mic'd up with an SM57 and a 421, which another interesting thing that's worth quickly noting is that my 421 microphone was wired internally out of polarity. It's wired backwards. But these channels 1 and 2 have a phase reverse button. So I can just polarity reverse the 421 with that button, and suddenly they are perfectly, well, as long as I do my job right, perfectly time aligned. So here it is, completely transparent with the HMX, with lots of HMX and then lots of iron and then both. And I'm not going to touch any parameters other than those so you can hear the difference. It is subtle, but it's the kind of thing that in a mix I think can add a certain something.
So this is the SM7 test that I do on every preamp or interface shootout. This is just me talking at a reasonable volume into the SM7 with the gain on the interface as high as it will go. And as you can hear, the noise floor is very low with me talking with the signal coming through quite strongly, which means there's quite a lot of available clean gain on this preamp. This is the ASP800 with the HMS and iron turned off. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to the HMX. So this is the same preamp with the same levels, but with the HMX feature turned on around 12 o'clock noon, so halfway through its range of motion. If you listen quietly, you can hear that the noise floor has gone up a little, but I suppose that's to be expected with adding all sorts of harmonics in. Next up is going to be the iron. Okay, so this is with the HMS turned back off, but the iron turned on. The noise floor seems to have gone back down, but it's put the transformer, I don't know if it's one or two transformers into the circuit, and it certainly comes forward rather than the completely clean version. And also it's much more difficult to completely saturate and clip the sound, which is useful. It means that I can record things like heavy vocals or heavy guitars, and if there's a bit of a transient in there, the transformer catches it before it gets to a digital clip. Not that you should be tracking anywhere near those kind of levels, but that kind of harmonic saturation can be quite nice. So now what we're going to do, that was the iron at 12 o'clock by the way, now we're going to do the HMX and the iron, both completely full on, both together, to give you an idea. Okay, so this is the SM7 test with both the HMX and the iron on, absolutely at full volume. And you can hear that the vocal quality is suddenly quite thick, that it's not as clear, but it sounds a lot more kind of vintage. And this sounds, to me, like something that would fit quite well in a rock mix, where if you're going for something like female R&B or pop vocal, I have already found through using the 800 that doesn't work so well for that application, but you can just turn it off. Unlike with something like a vintage preamp where it then is what it is.
Another thing that's worth mentioning is those two super channels, as I call them, have DI inputs. So this is where we've talked about before, do you need a DI box? Is a DI box better? And arguably the case is still, yes, you should have a DI box running into the microphone input, but if you're running low on DI boxes, because this is designed as a discrete set of preamps, it isn't just something tacked on that you might find on lower cost interfaces where they've just stuck a DI channel on it. This is integrated into the front of a properly designed preamp. I've seen, like, again, Neve 1073s modified to have a DI where the DI is a high impedance input that gets fed straight into the microphone input and is done properly. And as far as I'm aware, this is the case here, that I've used these to record some tracks of the last few days, almost out of laziness, almost out of convenience. But because the noise floor has been practically zero and the clarity's been there, I've not felt the need to go and grab my nice tube DI boxes, which is about the best recommendation I can give for the DIs, that I've got great DI boxes and I'm not listening back going, I really need to get those out. I'm just going, sounds great. What more can I say about that? So all in all, for the price point that these are at, which is £500, £550, depending on where you find them, whether you find them in a deal or whatever, this is 8 world-class channels. It could be made more expensive, they could price themselves up to make it look more expensive, but I think they've really done a clever thing here by keeping the price at a decent point where the barrier to entry is relatively low. I mean, if you're looking to record seriously, then you should be graduating beyond 2-channel interfaces anyway. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to expand your channel count, you can do a lot worse than an Audient ASP800. One thing that I should say behind the scenes is I'm so impressed with the ASP800 that I have purchased this myself from Audient. I will not be giving it back. This is a keeper, this is staying in my studio because it's good enough that it's staying. And I have enough channels as well. I've got things like my Focusrite Octo Pre's, which are just going to sit on the shelf now. One thing that I would mention is I would have liked to have seen a DAC option on this, because this is 8 world-class transparent modern preamps, like I said, with the analog to digital converters to get that in the system, but it doesn't have the circuitry to have 8 line outputs from the computer or from the interface, which means that I'm having to keep using my Focusrite Octopre just to use the outputs on it. Because using the ADAT solution that I'm using, it doesn't have any analog outputs. They're all digital, so I have to convert that to analog to use it for things like the monitor outs, headphone mixes, alternate speaker mixes, reamp outs. I need outputs. So that's the one thing that I would say, if there's anything I would change, if there was a Mark II version, outputs please. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video and found this useful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because as we're growing, and we are growing now, this is really helping us to get in contact with companies and start reviewing more and interesting gear like the Audient stuff, where we can give you a fairly unbiased explanation review, tell you whether we think you should buy things or not, and hopefully be useful to you. So I'm Adam Steele for the Hot Pole Studios. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.